Welcome to Maths with Bob. Today we're going to have a quick look at percentages and the idea of finding percentages of quantities and increasing things by percentages and decreasing things by percentages. So the first thing is, what makes a percentage? Well, let's have a quick look. Okay, here we have a number, 20. Okay. Now, as it stands, obviously it's a number. It's not a percentage until it has its wonderful little percentage sign attached to it. Now, this is, there's a little percentage sign. Okay, here it is. Okay, here is the thing which makes a percentage. The symbol, per 100. Now, percentages, well, they're actually the symbol per 100. If you have a look at the difference, there's actually a couple of other symbols you can actually use. Let's have a look. If I have I'll just show you a couple of other ones while we're here. Okay, that's per 1,000. Okay, and there's another one for the basis points. This one. So the actual percentage symbol itself is not unique. There are other type of related symbols like the percentage symbol. Okay. All right, so the first idea is to recognize something as a percentage and realize that it is per 100, not 1,000 or 10,000. Okay, so that's the first thing. And I guess we would try and interpret, what does it mean, 20%? Well, 20%, okay, is 20 out of 100, and we could say that, in fact, that is equivalent to a fraction. Okay, let's have a look. What would it be equivalent to? Let's actually just have a quick look. 20%, okay. 20%. Well, we know it's equal to 20 out of 100. Now, hopefully we can see that we could cancel that down to 1/5. Okay, so we could say, instead of 20%, we could say 1/5. Now, we could always write, and I think this is the best way to handle percentages, is to write them as decimals. So 20% is 20 over 100, and you might remember when you divide by 100, you move the decimal place over 2 places to your right, so it becomes 0.2. So 20% is equivalent, if you like, to the fraction 1/5 or the decimal 0.2. So how do you handle finding a percentage of a quantity? Well, let's actually just have a quick look. Say someone says, do you find, say, 20%, say, let's say, of, say, let's have a look, $160. Now, we can do this one in our head. Let's have a look at a mental way of trying to do this one. Okay, 20%. Well, 10%, okay, is just $16, hopefully we can see. How do we know that? Well, a tenth of 160 is dividing it by 10. You can see it's 16. Okay, and 20% will be 2 times 10%, which would be $32. So the answer would be actually $32. Now, as the problems get harder, what I suggest is always convert the percentage to a decimal. So how we'd write this in the calculator, we'd do this one in the calculator fairly easily. We go 20%, which would convert to a decimal, 0.2, and then we just multiply it by the quantity. Okay, well, the amount, in this case, at $160. And if you try that in the calculator, you should get $32. Okay. Suppose the percentage got a bit more complicated. Say it was, let's have a look, 5 3/4%. This is where we need to, okay. Okay, 5 3/4%. Well, we just convert 5 3/4% to, I think, first of all, make it a decimal, 5.75%, and then convert it to actually from a percentage to a whole decimal, if you like, and then becomes what? Move the decimal point 2 places to the right, because we're dividing by 100, 0.0575. Okay, and if I had to find 5 3/4% of, say, 160, we go on the calculator. Okay, 0.0575 times 160. Okay, and you can see here, this is one of the ones we couldn't really do in our head. we just have to type this into our calculator. Just type this into our calculator. 0.0575 times 160, and you should get $9.20 or $9.2. Okay, which would just convert $9.20. Okay, so you can see here when the percentages get more complicated. It's we can't usually do them in our heads. 20%, is a fairly easy one. I could even go to the, find 1% of $160 and say it's $1.60 and then times that by 20 as well. But in this case, 5.75%, well, I could probably find 1%, as we know it's $1.60, and then try and find 3/4 and then multiply by 5 and add 0.75% on. But I think since we have calculators available to us, we may as well just convert all our percentages to decimals, okay? And how you do that, you could actually just type 5.75 into your calculator divided by 100. Most calculators will handle that, converting it to a decimal, and then just multiply it by the quantity or the amount which you need to find. So that's basically how we do percentages. Let's actually have a look at some other percentages, just while we're on this. Suppose, what is 0.5%, actually? Okay, so what is 0.5% as a decimal? And let's have a look at, say, 25 and 3/8 as a percent, as a decimal. Okay, so 0.5%, okay, is actually 0.5%. Okay, and we hopefully can see that we move the decimal place 2 places to the right. As a decimal, it would be 0.005. This is actually a decimal. Okay, so you may need to practice converting some of your percentages to decimals. How about 25 and 3/8? Well, 25.375. You hopefully know 3/8 is as a decimal. Okay, percent, and then hopefully as a decimal now. Well, that's a decimal. As a percentage decimal, I guess you could say, a mixture of a whole number and a decimal as a percent. But we now want to convert it to a whole decimal, if you like. So it's, as you can see here, it's 25.375 per 100. And we'd then convert it by moving the decimal place, as you know, 2 places to the right. So it becomes 0.25375 as a decimal. Okay, and you can see here, sometimes, these are now getting more complicated. If I wanted to find 25 and 3/8% of $160, okay, let's actually pose that as a problem. Okay, so what do we want to do? We want to find, let's see, okay, let's just try and find, so let's find, okay, 23 and 3/8 actually, 3/8% of $160. Okay, so let's actually see how we do that. Well, I'll just slowly do it. So what would you do? Well, I'll give you a few seconds to think about it. Obviously, it's going to be what? 0.23. Okay, now it's going to be what? 375 times, say, 160. Okay, and then we just obviously need to do this as a calculation exercise. Okay, looks like it's $37.34. Okay, so you can just check that yourself on the calculator. Slightly different to the 25 and 3/8 before, but a similar sort of idea. Okay, all right, now the next idea is we want to start to increase things by percentages. Okay, so what happens if I want to increase something by 20%? So, okay, let's have a look. Now, increase. So let's increase $160 by 20%. What does that mean? Well, it means I want to basically add 20% to $160, if you like, make it bigger. Okay, obviously we're going to get a bigger amount. And you could probably do that in your head as well. So I'd want to increase it by, what, $32, and we should be able to get $192 practically in our head. So what is a strategy for increasing things by a percentage? Well, really what you're doing is when you say you increase something by a percentage, you are getting the original amount, which is 100%, and then adding on, if you like, this percentage. So I then really am, what was the situation? Well, really, okay, what are we doing? We're finding, okay, 120% of $160. Oops, $160. Okay, so as a decimal, 120%, as you can see here, is 1.2, and multiplied by $160. And you can see that if you do that on the calculator, you should get, okay, well, you know what it is anyway, 160 plus 32, $192. Okay, that's okay. So really when you're increasing something, you're just adding 100% to it, so you just increase the percentage by 100%, convert it to a decimal, multiplied by the quantity, basically. All right, now let's suppose we are now going to decrease it by 20%. So instead of increasing it by 20%, we want to, say, decrease. Okay, so I want to decrease $160 by 20%. Okay, so what are we really doing? Well, we're finding 20% and taking it off. So the amount is going to be smaller than $160 by 20%. But what I like to think of it like, what is remaining? If you actually decrease something by 20%, you're really finding 80%, aren't you? Because you've actually taken off 20%. So you're finding really 80% of the amount, $160. Now, so really when you are decreasing something by a percentage, you are basically trying to work out what is in fact left, okay, and you are then basically, like if you like, building that up to 100%. So if you like, say, if you decrease something by 10%, you know that you take 10% off 100% and you get 90%. So you're really finding 90% of the amount. And if you decrease something by 25%, well, you know that there's 75% left, if you like. Think of it like that. So what will we do here? Well, we can do this one in our head as well, because we know that 10% was 16 and 20% was $32. So I need to subtract $32 from $160. Or on a calculator, just check this, 0.8 times $160 should be, what, $128. Okay, that's not too bad. Okay, let's try another problem. Let's actually make the percentage actually a little bit more complicated. Okay. Okay, so let's increase $160 by now 23.75%. So what does this mean? Well, we're going to find 123.75% of $160. So we'd write this as, on the calculator, convert it to a decimal, 123, so it's going to be 1.23, and 3/4, as you know, is 75 or 0.75. So we need to do this on the calculator. Okay. All right. So I'll just give you a few seconds. Try that one. See what happens. So it'd be 1.2375 on the calculator, multiplied by 160 dollars, and you should get, what, $198. Okay, so this turns out to be $198. Okay, all right, so now let's try and decrease it now. So let's actually, instead of increasing it by that, let's actually decrease. Okay, so obviously now this is going to be, obviously, let's do this again. So we now have to work out, okay, what is the percentage left after I take off 23.75. So it's basically, if you like, 100 minus 23.75, and if you do that in the calculator, you should get 76.25 or 76.25%. So really, we're going to find, okay, 76.25%. of 160, because this is equivalent to, if you like, finding 23.75% and then subtracting it off 160. So what we're doing is we're finding the amount which is left, which is actually 76.25%. So on a calculator, what we do, 0.7625 and multiply it by $160. Okay, so really, let's try that on a calculator as well. Okay. And you should get $122. $122. Okay, we'll now just look at what's something called the unitary method. Now, let's say, let's change this slightly. So let's actually just say that 23.75%, of an amount is in fact $160. Okay, so let's say. Okay, now we're now going to look at what's called the unitary method. Now, the unitary method, it's basically along the lines of if, let's have a look. If 23.75% of an amount say is $160. Okay, and the question would normally be, what is the amount? And that's the question. Okay, so the unitary method is actually along the lines of, a percentage is, of an amount is something, in this case $160. We know we've got 23.75%, and that is obviously $160. And just as a rough guess, let's have a look. That's nearly 25%, so it should be 4 times 160 roughly. But how are we going to do this? Well, the technique is actually something called the unitary method, which basically relies on finding 1%. So it's actually called the unitary method. Okay. What this basically means is you find 1% first, and how are we going to do that? So let's actually do that in blue. So we know that what is 1%? 1% obviously is 160 now is divided by 23.75. Now this is 1%, because as a percent. Now we need to then multiply that by 100 to build it back up to what's called its original amount. So if we now need to find what the amount was, the amount is obviously 100%, and then we need to therefore 100% is what? 160 on 23.75, times 100 over 1. Now, you can do this a few ways, but obviously you're going to need a calculator to do this, and most unitary method ones you will need a calculator, especially if they're a bit more complicated. So you can either do this by 160 divided by 23.75 multiplied by 100, or let's actually just do it slightly differently. Let's actually just go on the calculator, 160 multiplied by 100. Okay, that's obviously 16,000, and then just divided by 23.75. Now, this should give us an answer, $673.68 to the nearest cent. So this is going to be, to the nearest cent, $673.68. This is obviously to the nearest cent. Okay, now this is this idea of the unitary method is lots of areas, and but basically what happens is you find 1% of something, and then you just build it up to the original amount, which is is 100%. Okay, well, thank you very much for watching, and bye for now.